from Michigan.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My colleagues across the aisle have focused almost single-handedly on the southern border today. We have heard very little about challenges we face at our northern border, which is more than twice as long as our southern border and critical to our economy. In my district in Michigan, many businesses and individuals rely on being able to travel and ship goods regularly across the border. Ensuring customs and border protection has the personnel and resources needed to keep ports of entry open and process people and goods efficiently is essential. Unfortunately, a shortage of pathways for immigration has made our borders very difficult to manage. CBP has had to rely on temporary duty assignments to surge employees where they are most needed, which has often pulled resources away from the northern border. As an immigrant myself, I'm a proud example of how immigrants contribute to American society. I was fortunate to have the opportunity to come to the United States to pursue my PhD in chemistry and then gain citizenship. As a business owner, I have created hundreds of jobs and helped drive innovations. Unfortunately, this American dream is available to far too few. Our immigration system remains extremely restrictive despite a major need for workers among American businesses. Even worse, we often hear rhetoric scapegoating immigrants for increasing crime and taking American jobs when all available evidence shows that immigrants, in fact, make us safer and grow our economy. When I was applying for a student visa, my visa was denied 4 times. And at the 5th time, when I introduced the same papers that they denied the 4th time, they approved my visa. When I asked why the visa officer changed her mind, I was told that she was in America on her vacation, and another agent looked at my papers and approved them.
I'm glad you didn't give up, sir.
Yes, Mr. Beer, would expanding pathways for legal immigration make it easier for CBP to manage the southern border and, in turn, allow for more personnel and resources to focus on the northern border as well?
Oh, absolutely. We've already seen it in action with the Ukrainian crisis. We had tens of thousands of Ukrainians showing up. We created a parole process for them so they can fly directly from Europe to the United States with U.S. sponsorship. That program has worked great. They expanded it to Venezuela and Haiti and Nicaragua and Cuba. It's also reducing the number of crossings from those countries now that we have a legal immigration process set up for them. Just to give you one other example, there was a story about an Afghan who showed up at our border. We hear about these people who travel thousands and thousands of miles to get here. He won the diversity visa lottery. He had the opportunity to come legally, and as a result of the pandemic, they shut down all the visa processing, so he never got his green card, and then he showed up at our southern border. So the consequences of restricting legal immigration are real for our border communities, and if we can get legal immigration right, we can fix this problem. We need people. You're absolutely right.
Thank you, Mr. Beer, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Jimenez from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And on January 29th, I had a meeting with Secretary Mayorkas where I asked a number of simple questions. He was upset that I was amazed that he didn't have the answer, but he said he had the answer right at his fingertips. So on the 31st, I sent him a letter saying, according to U.S. Customs and Border Protection, Over 4.5 million migrants encounters have occurred at the southwest border since President Biden took office. How many of those individuals encountered are currently residing in the United States, and where are they residing? What is the process for choosing location to release individuals, and what sort of information is given to those local authorities? Second question, how many of these individuals have authorized work permits? Do those who receive work permits receive federal government assistance? If so, how many, and how much per individual? Do those individuals who do not have authorized work permits receive federal government assistance? If so, how many, and how much per individual? And finally, according to CBP sources, over 1.2 million known gotaways have evaded the CBP. How many of those have since been located by CBP? What are the current steps being taken by the Department of Homeland Security in processing individuals who have been captured and detained, and how many immigrants who were unknown to DHS have been detained and departed over the past 2 years? He said he had all that information. I asked for the answer to come back in about a week. I've sent this on January 31st. Mr. Chairman, I've yet to receive a response from something that apparently they had at their fingertips. But luckily for me, today I got a call from a friend of mine who has some of the answers. And here are some of the answers. And he said that he was speaking to a friend of ours or a friend of his down in Miami who's recently sent $20,000 to Cuba to have a migrant come over to Mexico, and then they were transported across the borders. So it was $20,000. When the migrant came across, he was immediately given a cell phone, he was given a plane ticket, and he was given $1,600 a month for 6 months in federal assistance. And now, since he hasn't answered me, now I got to multiply 4.7 million times $1,600 times 6 months. It's costing the U.S. taxpayer something north of $45 billion. So it definitely impacted the United States of America. And I want to shift gears here. And Ms. Reisling, I really sympathize with what happened to you personally. I had a death in my family about 4 years ago from drug overdoses. I used to be a paramedic in the city of Miami, where we saw a lot of drug overdoses due to heroin. Never saw anything like fentanyl and the deadly, deadly kind of a drug that fentanyl is. Now, you're absolutely right. Fentanyl has killed, drug overdoses have skyrocketed. Over 100,000 Americans probably per year are dying of fentanyl. Now, can you imagine if a foreign adversary came across the border every single day, killed 200 Americans, and then scurried back, across the border? How we would react to something like that? Well, it's happening every single day. And we have a terrorist organizations, which are the Mexican drug cartels, which are profiting immensely from human trafficking. Where before, in the Trump administration, they made about $500 million a year. Now they're making $13 billion a year on human trafficking. But worse than that, they're killing Americans. A little bit over 20 years ago, a terrorist organization came over, killed about 3,000 Americans, and we went and traveled 15,000 miles and waged 15 years of war to get rid of that terrorist organization. We're doing absolutely nothing about a terrorist organization that's killing far more Americans every single year, and we're doing nothing about it. And so, I asked the Secretary of the Director of the FBI if he considered them to be a terrorist organization, and I guess because of some bureaucracy, we just can't label them a terrorist organization. But, we should be doing a heck of a lot more. We should be making them pay for what they're doing to us. And while I agree of an all-and-above solution to our drug problem here, with the users, et cetera, I also think that the people that are supplying that weapon that's killing 100,000 Americans every year need to pay the price. And thank you. I yield my time back.
The gentleman yields. Will now recognize Mr. Swalwell from California for his 5 minutes.
Chairman, if it's okay with you, actually I was going to let Mr. Ivey go ahead of me, and then I'll go the next round.
You good with that, Mr. Ranking Member? Okay. Chair recognizes Mr. Ivey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. Thank you, Congressman Swalwell. I appreciate the chance to address the the committee on this today. I heard a lot of comments this morning. Negligent homicide, perhaps a military strike in Central America are two of the things I've heard. I'm not ready to go there, I must say, and I hope the United States isn't there either. I think, Mr. Beer, I appreciate your testimony. I'll come back to you in a moment. But one point I wanted to make initially, and with the chart here behind me, is that there are things we can do short of military options or, trying to prosecute the secretary for negligent homicide. And the Democrats have already taken steps to do that. So with respect to the omnibus bill, which is behind me, it's in the blue chart. You can see it up on the monitor. Those are the amounts that we passed last Congress. I wasn't here yet, but that was an omnibus bill. And I say we, based on Democrats, we had 216 Democrats voted for this bill. Only 9 Republicans joined in. I don't think any of them are on this committee. 200 Republicans voted against it. So the talk we're hearing about the things that need to happen and get done, part of that goes to the need to have resources to address it, like more border agents, for example. Mr. Correa talked about the need for surveillance at the border, the ability to check vehicles as they come across ports of entry. And as Mr. Beal, as your testimony points out, I think it's like 86% of the fentanyl and narcotics come across through points of entry as opposed to the other border areas. So why don't we focus on that? Well, the bill we passed helps to do that. And we can go through all of these. I'm short on time, but the point I want to make is on the left side, under the blue, is the money that was passed in the omnibus bill, primarily by Democratic votes. The red side is the Republican legislation that's been offered. I just mentioned most Republicans voted against the omnibus bill that passed last year and is actually sending resources to the border to help address many of these issues. And I know the Biden administration has said that more is going to come when the budget proposal comes out on March 9th. Under the red, though, as you can see, is goose eggs all the way down the page. And that comes from H.R. 29, which was supposedly the Republican leadership bill on addressing this issue. And just for those of you that don't know, the leadership bills are supposed to be statements of that party's focus. These are top priority bills. We need to pass these things to address the key problems facing the American people. And so I picked H.R. 29 because that was designated by House Republicans. We looked at other bills too, and they haven't put out any money for that either that we can find. But I thought H.R. 29 was representative, and they call it the Border Safety and Security Act of 2023. They put up no funds for any of the types of things in the programs you all are talking about or challenges. I know you have different views about what the cause of the problems are and all of that, but I think almost all of them require additional resources. So, from that old movie, I forget, Jerry Maguire, I think it was, Show Me the Money. Your budget shows your priorities. The budget priorities stated by the Republican caucus so far is that they want to talk about, let me get this right, prosecuting Mr. Mayorkas for negligent homicide. They want to talk about removing Mr. Mayorkas from office, but fixing the border crisis, which what I thought this hearing was going to be about. We don't get much conversation about that. Mr. Beer, I've only got a minute. Let me come to you quickly. We just talked a moment ago about the 86% of U.S. citizens are actually carrying the fentanyl across the border. Is that right?
That's right, in 2021.
That's on page 7 of his testimony. By the way, your testimony had 115 footnotes. So in contrast to a lot of the episodic and, that kind of stuff, your testimony is clearly documented with data, which I think is an important way to figure out what sort of policies we should be enacting. 93% of the fentanyl that was seized came through ports of entry. Is that correct?
That's right.
With respect to the legalization, you were accused of wanting to legalize fentanyl. I didn't see that in anything you wrote. I did see you talk about legalizing fentanyl test strips. Is that part of what you're talking
right.
about?
Legalizing test strips would enable drug users to make sure that they are not taking fentanyl, which would have prevented the deaths that we're hearing about today.
Yeah, by the way, we've had some of those deaths in Maryland. We're not on the border, but Prince George's County, where I'm from, Montgomery County, Mr. Trone and I put a bill together to address that in part. I support it. I believe it's a bipartisan bill. Hopefully the Republicans on the committee will support that as well. I see I've run out of my time. I'll come back, though. I want to talk to you about the impact of what you've seen in Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua from an immigration standpoint, and the change in the legislation that really addressed the problem there in the ways that you're talking about.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I
Gentleman's
yield
time
the
has
balance.
expired. I now recognize Ms. Green from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have one job in the federal government, and that is to protect the United States of America, our national security, and all Americans, their life, their liberty, and their pursuit of happiness. And since the Biden administration has taken over, there has been a direct result in the number of deaths in this country from fentanyl. I want you to know that in 2020, there were 4.8 thousand pounds of fentanyl seized by CBP. But in 2021, fiscal year 2021, it increased to 11.2 thousand pounds of fentanyl was seized by the CBP. That is a direct result of Biden administration failure policies. Now, here we are, to date, fiscal year 2023, they have already seized 12.5 thousand pounds of fentanyl. The Biden administration is failing this country by not protecting our border and securing our border and stopping Chinese fentanyl from being brought into our country illegally by the cartels, and people are dying every single day because of it. Fentanyl deaths have doubled between 2 years, from April 2019 to April 2021. Those are the statistics we have. Fentanyl deaths doubled from 32,754 to 64,178. This is a complete failure. I want you to know it's affecting every single state in the country. In Georgia, fentanyl deaths have gone up by 230%. In rural Northwest Georgia, my district, the 14th district, we are up 350%. Fentanyl does not discriminate on your skin color, your gender, your politics. Fentanyl kills everyone. It kills police officers, first responders, and tragically, fentanyl is now the #1 cause of death of young Americans ages 18 to 45. And this is unforgivable. The Biden administration is responsible for this, and they have blood on their hands because they refuse to secure our border. Today we have a witness with us, Ms. Kiesling. I just want to tell you I am so sorry from one mother to another for the death of your 2 sons that died from fentanyl poisoning. That should never have happened. Should never have happened to you. It should never happen to any family. It happens to families at home where I live. It happens to pretty much everyone we know. And I want to ask you, first I want to thank you for being brave to come here and share your grief with our committee. But Ms. Kiesling, would your sons be alive today if our government would secure our southern border?
The year Caleb was born, 2000, there were 20,000 drug-related deaths. And the year they died, it was 5 times as many. And I appreciate you using the term fentanyl poisoning, because that's what it was. It wasn't an overdose. They had no idea that they were doing anything that could kill them. And it's because fentanyl got into this country. I heard this man over here from the Cato Institute, talk about, well, it's because of demand. What I'm hearing him say is they asked for it. What the hell? Seriously? Are you kidding me? We need to protect our children. They didn't ask for that. This wasn't demand that they wanted the fentanyl. They didn't want fentanyl. They thought they were getting Percocets. Okay? He's absolutely clueless. Like, total disconnect from what's happening. And to say, oh, let's just give them strips or let's give them rehab. Well, you know what? My kids got my son Caleb went to federal rehab. It was a flop house. It wasn't real rehab. You're wasting your money where you're sending it. I'm telling you, it's a waste of money because it wasn't real rehab. And The government paid for their drugs under COVID. They encouraged them not to stay home. All these young people in our support groups, we all talk about it, how they paid for their drugs with the federal funds under COVID that gave them incentive not to work. Healthy young people.
Thank you, Ms. Kiesling. This government has failed you, and it's failing American families. And it's failing, most of all, it's failing our children and our young people. Thank you very
The
much.
lady's time has expired.